And welcome to Civil Discourse. Today we are joined by Caroline Stewart, who's a psychotherapist and president of A New Path, to discuss drug abuse and a mindful approach to recovery and addiction. Would you like to introduce yourself really quick?
Well, thank you so much, Jayme. My name is Caroline Stewart. As Jayme said, I have a son who tragically suffers from addictive illness. He's been ill about 20 years. And a few years ago, I was teaching social work at San Diego State University, and I read about an organization called A New Path. And it's an organization that provides policy support to change policies to stop the stigma of addiction and to promote more clinically informed understandings of addictive illness, and also to promote all aspects of harm reduction and to stop the inappropriate excessive incarceration of people with nonviolent substance abuse problems.
What are some of, I guess, the biggest misconceptions you think are out there about addiction and recovery?
Oh boy, I
There's
can
so
talk
many.
for hours. Well, okay, the biggest one that is so grating to me is the belief in the community that addiction is a choice, and that people who suffer from addiction, who overuse certain substances, have a character disorder, and that they are characterologically bad people. And there's significant research to help us understand that it's way more complex than that, and that many people with addictive illness have pre-existing brain vulnerability. And then added to that, some of them, not all, have life trauma that creates a synergy that can put someone at risk for addictive illness. My son is adopted, and he was learning disabled, and I think he was bullied as a child, but I do think that he had biological loading for addiction that pre-existed any trauma. So I think, I'm not saying it's one or the other. I think it's a dance between life experience and genetic loading. So that's certainly a big thing. I think the other horrible truth about addiction is that treatment is misguided. It tragically often focuses on abstinence and a refusal to understand that that's not a clinically informed attitude. And don't even get me started about how outraged I am about the fact that people who are in treatment and then have a reoccurrence, which used to be called relapse, which I hate that word, but they have a reoccurrence of their condition, that they are kicked to the curb. They're asked to leave treatment at the very time when they may need more wraparound services, more engagement, more emotional support, more support in every way. So those are the two biggest errors, but there are a multitude of them.
Mm-hmm. Actually, to add, I wanted to ask a little bit more about what you said. You said you don't like the word relapse,
No.
Which I appreciate. Can you explain why you don't like that word and you choose the word that you use?
If a person, so I am borrowing from the analogy that addictive illness is, in fact, where the brain, in a way, is it serves the individual in some ways, but in many ways it's a problem. We call it addictive illness. I know people are offended by that. They call it an illness. But I actually think that we need to have, to think of breast cancer. We don't say that someone whose breast cancer has come back, that they're relapsing. The word relapse implies, again, some willful decision making, that someone's opting to choose this path. And I find that totally offensive and against the truth of what's going on. That if many of my patients have had a reoccurrence of using for complex reasons that have to do with, maybe I had one woman have a reoccurrence when her husband committed suicide. Uh, I don't know how much choice was involved in that. I think she needed something, and the substance was very soothing for her at the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I think that that really speaks to kind of bring in the mindful perspective. I think that you are very mindful about how you speak about it, and so that's a much more mindful perspective, recognizing that relapse is assuming that there's a choice, assuming that there's a decision made, and there's a judgment behind the choice to label it as relapse. And I think that that kind of speaks to that treatment, not always, but traditionally, I think a lot of treatment was much more judgmental, and much more labeled people, and kind of tended to push people into the margins. And I think that recognizing that, it's a reoccurrence rather than a relapse, and not judging someone and actually offering them more treatment is a much more mindful way to treat somebody as a whole.
Absolutely. I think there's another word that offends me, and basically that's graduate. A lot of the programs have graduations for people. Yeah. And again, if we borrow from breast cancer or some other lifelong medical struggle like diabetes, the person might have remission for a while, but that we're not asking them to graduate to somehow no longer have that issue. We need to have compassion and understand that many of these folks will struggle with this issue for a lifetime, and that there's no harm in having reoccurrence. It's all right. It's part of the course of the condition, and that we need to again work with them in a very compassionate and clinically informed way. Yeah, I actually used to work in a neonatal intensive care unit, and I've been trying to promote a form of neonatal program for people with addictive illness. What I mean by that is, in a neonatal unit, a newborn can go up and down in the unit according to the acuity, the severity of the illness. And I think that there need to be programs where people are welcome wherever they are in their illness, and that if they have reoccurrence, they are welcome to be on like the main floor, where they have safe injection sites and showers and food and emotional support. And if they want to get better, they can go up a floor, and they can have an opportunity to have safe, clinically informed detox. If they get better, if they want even more, they can go upstairs and have long-term therapeutic recovery with psychotherapy and CBT. I think we need NICUs for people with addictive illness, where you're welcome wherever you are in your illness.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. My brother has also been dealing with addiction for many, many years. And a little under a year ago, he had a series of strokes from an overdose and was in critical care. And they didn't think he was going to make it through, but he ended up making it through. And I think one of the biggest challenges after was how the family could help. There was a lot of everyone, I think, because the stigma is so inaccurate, a lot of people tried to help, and in the way they were helping, it was actually enabling the addiction. And then there was just a lack of ability to communicate with him and his recovery. They thought he should be recovering a lot sooner, even though it was only a few months after it happened. So what would you say families should know most about dealing with someone in their family or a loved one that is an addict?
Right. So I always say that my husband and I, we're high school sweethearts. We've been together almost 50 years, and our son's been ill for over 20 years, so we've been at this a long time. I say that he and I live about 100 feet up off the ground on a very thin wire. We've been there for 20 years. Sometimes we fall off. We get tired. Sometimes we try to do the right thing by him, to love him and be abiding parents who are not judgmental. But what I tell my families is sometimes we fall off on the side of tough love, and sometimes we fall off on the other side of enabling. And I don't think I have a miraculous answer about that. It's the one thing I know I love about my organization, A New Path, is we've always argued that our premise is that we should try to keep our children alive for the cure. Now that's kind of grand talk, but it's borrowed from AIDS, where they tried to keep the AIDS patients alive for the cure. Is there a cure? Well, actually, with AIDS, we're getting closer to it. Is there a cure for addictive illness? No, but we do want to keep our children alive. So I do think that's, but the other thing I'll say is I wrote an article last year called Do Not Hate the Tiger. And this is what I say to people. If I'm sitting in my office and a tiger comes into my office, a wild tiger, not a domesticated tiger, I'm going to jump up and hit it with a table and try to jump off my balcony. I'm going to get away from it. But I don't hate that tiger. Even if it tries to kill me, I don't hate it. And I have no contempt for it. I appreciate it that it's strategic, it's doing what a tiger does. In a way, I try to teach my families they need to have their child at times might be a tiger, or their brother, a tiger, but we shouldn't hate them or have contempt. Their brain is giving them cues to be strategic. So they lie, or they steal, or they do all kinds of crazy ass stuff. But that doesn't mean that they're evil. The tiger's not evil, but it might fully try to kill me if it came in my office. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I think we need to promote understanding. However, I also tell my clients, the family members, I don't want to live with a tiger. I don't want to live under the same roof. So actually, when our son is actively using, as he has been much of the time over the years, we have tried to live with him, and it's very difficult. So that I can't advise people what to do, because it's very painful for a mother to abandon their child. But so my son's currently homeless. I love him, but I can't live with him. He's like a tiger right now. Will he become himself again? I hope so. Can I help him? Yes, we help him with food. My husband's off at the Big Five buying him a tent tonight. Does that sound like a mean spirit? He lived with us and was very menacing, stole everything we owned. It was not an easy, even as he stole from us, we still loved him, but we can't live with him. And so that's one thing I'd advise people. Also, get support from other families. Like here in San Diego, I run with NAMI, the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill. I run a support group for parents who have children with addictive illness and psychiatric illness. And so we rally, we do fun things, and sometimes we have to compartmentalize, live side by side with the grief, and not let the illness destroy us, because it could totally destroy us. We've been at this 20 years and it's almost amazing we're still going well, but we're okay.
I really like what you said, because it sounds like you're recommending that you have to be aware of where things are and balance. And so there's not one way to do it. You have to be mindfully aware of where things are, with the safety issues that are at play currently in the moment, and whether your loved one is in the tiger state or if they're more themselves, and kind of managing that way. And I think that that's a really important thing for families to hear, because I myself, my family has struggled with addiction my whole life with different family members, and there's always, when someone's in the tiger space, there's a lot of feelings of guilt, and feeling like you're letting someone down, feeling like you can't, like you're not doing enough. But at the same time, there also does have to be protecting yourself and your safety and the safety of your home. And so it's a difficult dance. And I really just like that idea that it's a relationship. And so you don't have to be one way. You have to be mindful of all of, of what space you're at and work from there. And I really like that. Yeah, without judgment, but still with compassion and love, and that you can love that person, though you're setting boundaries and not allowing them to live with you.
Right.
You can still be connected and still have that relationship in some way.
I actually just wrote a new article about my son living on the street, and the other thing I think I failed to understand all these years is that he has a community on the street. He has a sense of what Martin Buber calls communitas, a real sense of shared suffering and oneness. So he's not as miserable as we would think, because on the street, he's fully accepted. People aren't judging him or scolding him or telling him he's a bad person. So ironically, it hasn't been as horrific as one might think. I mean, I'm not being a Pollyanna. I don't want him being on the street, but I think sometimes we stereotype people, and I don't think that people understand how there can be positives even for something that looks terrible, like living on the street.
Yeah, it's interesting because you talk about your son, and everyone who deals with addiction, it's unique for each person. But when you talk about him, it feels like you're talking about my brother. So it's interesting that it's this kind of shared, almost like a shared experience, but also a very unique one to the individual.
I actually even had an aha moment recently, thinking that sometimes when either my patients or my son has a reoccurrence, that he needs to be with his people again. He needs to go back out of the punitive, scolding, residential treatment, that school marm, wagging place that is, everybody's got to get up at the same time. Everybody's got to go to the meeting. There's a lot of institutionalization in these programs. I think sometimes he's desperate to connect in his own environment with his own people, and who love him and understand his journey, and who have forgiveness, and who aren't judging him.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Wow.
I'm like, I never thought about that, but I can definitely see that. And I think that, from our own perspective, not being the person who feels a sense of community in that place, you automatically, again, the judgment. So you must be miserable if you're on the street. But I remember, when I first moved to San Diego and I worked with the Prop 36 program, I remember learning that, no, there's definitely a sense of community. And some of my clients felt much more, a lot of my clients who had been home, had been in that community off and on for years, felt much more comfortable and authentic to themselves in that space, rather than trying to kind of fight through the regimental treatment,
The other thing I have learned is that the community isn't as fickle or transient as we think. My son's friends on the street are the same for years and years. I mean, it's not, now, of course, some people have left the street and wonderful. They have, I guess we call it recovery. They have remission. But the fact is that a lot of our son's friends are people that he and we have known now for 15, 20 years. So it's not this business that he can't sustain friendships, or I think we used to think that, the people on the street are fair weather friends and they're just addicts. And no, it's not like that. There is a community. I have a patient who's homeless. She's actually not a young woman, but she scolded me. She said, "Caroline, stop saying that I'm homeless. I'm home free."
Wow.
I mean, I'm sitting in the comfort of my home, and I don't want to be on the street, but I mean, it's a different perspective, right?
Yeah. And I'm curious, do you think there's any, um, do you think our culture and our society, and the way it is, and encourages addiction in any way?
Yeah, you're kidding, right?
Yeah, I just want you to talk about it.
I don't know.
I just want to bring this up.
I mean, come on. um, I I grew up. This is a true story. My parents were madmen. I grew up in the madmen household. My mother was a legal secretary. My father ran he was a corporate head, and they drank Manhattans at lunch. And they came home and drank whiskey and soda all night. And we kids, we were feral children. I think we grew ourselves up. And every single holiday, every party, everything in my household has always involved alcohol. Not street drugs, but alcohol certainly. Yes, I think that it's a huge component of our culture. Um, and probably for good reason. Our society promotes horrific anxiety in all of us, and alcohol's an anxiolytic. It makes us feel less anxious. Why wouldn't we love alcohol?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting because I also think with addiction, what I see a lot of people who are not addicts but have loved ones that are addicts is they think that the addiction itself is the only problem. So they think that, oh, if they get rid of the addiction, they'll be okay. And what I found specifically when I look at a lot of the people I know and my brother is they've been addicts for so long that they don't have a lot of the skills or the habits needed to actually thrive in the way we would think of thriving in society. Um,
Oh, yes, absolutely. In fact, that's one reason I'm offended by long waits to get into treatment, to think that the individual has adequate what we call executive functioning or future orientation to wait 3 months to
Right.
go into
right.
some stupid thing called treatment. How dare you?
Yeah.
People are not well enough to wait. They don't have the goal directness. They live moment to moment.
Right.
They don't, there's no way that they can wait. And once they're in there, I know Marilyn and I knew a wonderful program, but our patients, they were, some of them living in tents. How can you be expected to show up on time for clinical care if you are living in a tent? So I'm a big proponent of housing first. That we should let people give them safe environment, start them out with housing and some kind of enculturative process, hygiene, just even regularly taking a shower. Our son is not, he doesn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't have he doesn't even know what day it is. So I think you're absolutely right. We have the most bizarre high expectations of these people.
Yeah.
When in fact the first thing they need is to basically have an abiding place to go and a mission. Every human being needs a worthy mission to feel that they're making some small contribution. So those are some things.
Do you? I want to figure out how I'm going to ask this. I on that. Um, I feel like a lot of people who have loved ones and are trying to help them have this treatment to employment mentality. Like I hear a lot. Well, if they just get a job, it'll almost. They don't say that'll be the cure, but they think that that's what's going to teach them responsibility and all these things. What are your
Right.
feelings are on
I have a
employment?
lot of opinion about that. So here's something that is essential to everything we're talking about. The world is divided into two types of people, and I know I'm overgeneralizing, but this is a very interesting metaphor. So Marilyn and you and I I'm going to tell you, I know you better than you know yourself. Marilyn, you and I are farmers. We wake up in the morning, we think about what's ahead of us in our day. We're anxious, we're goal directed, we think about the obligation. And again, I'll stick with the metaphor of farmers. We go into the field, we weed for 10 hours, we might stop and have lunch. We carry in our mind's eye, it's also called the prefrontal cortex, we carry in our mind's eye future reward. Like in 4 months when the crop is done, Marilyn and I are going to go into town and buy a tractor. We're going to be able to reap reward. We're very future oriented. That's why we go to college. That's why we do pretty well on exams. That's why we're good citizens. We're very future oriented. Okay, so there's a whole other group of folks that are hunters. When they wake up in the morning, instead of asking themselves, what am I supposed to do with my day to day? They ask themselves the question, am I hungry? If they're hungry, they head out and they kill a bear and they skin the bear and they eat the bear, and then they go back and they may have a nap or sit around and shoot the breeze. But they live moment to moment to moment. They have very low frustration tolerance. So think about it. Both the hunters and the farmers can have addictive illness, but the farmers have much better outcomes because they can bring into their mind's eye how it could reward them to stay sober, for example. The hunters, it's very hard for them because they live moment to moment. They have low frustration tolerance. This is their wiring. My son has been a hunter since the day he arrived on Earth. He was 1 day old when we adopted him. He's a hunter, and he's living in a household of farmers. I mean, that's hard too. So anyway, I just want you to know, not everybody has the same brain wiring. And I think the hunters, we have really cruel expectations that they're all going to get a job and be future oriented. They're going to go to college. And no, what they would do well at is something that's very gratifying on a daily basis. I'm not talking about intelligence. The hunters can be smarter than the farmers, and they're very strategic. So they sometimes are financially better off than the farmers because we usually wind up working for people, not for ourselves. But so that's an important, and now you understand the difference. So the recovery rates are different, and I think the hunters are going to have a harder time being in a work program. Marilyn and I, if we had addictive illness, we'd probably do well in a work program. We'd like the work, it would give us a mission, and we think about how if we're good soldiers, we're going to get out of here. There'll be reward for us.
Yeah, I think that I love that analogy, and I love just how you bring in the brain wiring, because I think that's one thing that, again, we judge what's different, but we're just different. People are wired differently, and rather than
Right.
judge one is better or, we can't expect everybody to have farmers' goals. We can't set the goal for everybody in the world to be a farmer and then say that you failed because you didn't farm, because you weren't successful at this thing that you weren't even wired for. And yet that's what we do, all the time, where we have this ideal that everybody's kind of supposed to meet, and then when people aren't even wired for that, we consider them failing.
That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we also,
Well,
go ahead. On the
I was
show,
just going to say the farmers are judges. They're
Yeah.
auditors. So that's a
Good point. Yeah.
yeah, I just think it's interesting because on the show, it being rooted in mindfulness, we often talk about living in the moment, and you're talking about moment to moment, and the distinction I see there is when we talk about living in the moment, it's a conscious choice, and you have an awareness of what you're doing. Where what it seems like you're talking about is this living moment to moment, but not having the choice to do it. It's being locked and stuck in that moment to moment.
Well, that's so interesting you should say that, Jayme, because I teach mindfulness and embrace it fully. I mean, it's so much a part of my life. But I have to say, I find, of course, if we're farmers in a highly anxious, future-oriented society that puts so much pressure on us every day to worry about the future. Now, remember, anxiety is all about the future. Then mindfulness is our savior. But if we I think in a way, I'm going to be honest here. My son, you'd like him so much. He's very present. He is mindful.
Hmm.
Now, for example, like a year ago, he was living with us and he ran into the house. He's 34 years old. He ran in. He said, "Mommy, I want to show you something." He was sitting outside and he said, "I heard a caterpillar munching," and I'm going, "Oh yeah, right. You heard a caterpillar munching," and he showed me a caterpillar that was the largest thing I'd ever heard, and it was literally eating grape leaves and munching. Our son hears those things. He's so present. He loves nature. He sees if we love to hike with him. He'll see a snake or a lizard that we are so goal directed. We can trip over it and not see it. Our son is wired to be present. So,
Mm.
yeah, it's possible that you're correct that he's not saying to himself, "I'm present," but he is present. But our society doesn't reward that very much. Our society rewards our future orientation. So, our son, in a way, doesn't fit in here. It's a very hard life for someone who's present.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that because I think for myself now that I'm thinking about it, because I like goals is an interesting thing because I always talk about how you don't necessarily if you're living in the moment to moment fully, then you don't necessarily need goals because if you're aware of it, you can be open to the possibilities. But when I engage with society, I I know that I'm not going for the goals, but I act like I am. I put it on so that I will be accepted in the goal oriented thing. So when someone
Right.
says, "Oh, what are your goals?" I know what the answer should be, even though I personally don't think of it
Right.
that way. It's
Yeah. Right.
interesting how
Right.
to work if you're not what society tells you need to be, you almost have to fake it. And if you don't have that ability to fake it or don't want to fake it,
That's
it's
true.
harder.
Well, I have another thought that brings us to the fact that my organization is deeply involved with criminal justice, and
Mm.
that is that the farmers incarcerate the hunters in droves.
Mm.
We don't know what to do with these people. We don't like them. We find them too strategic, and the way that we're dealing with it is incarceration, and
Mm.
that is horrible. I think that if we could learn some manner to appreciate that different what's the right word, framing for the world, that more mindful presentness, and find some kind of mission that would be valuable. Maybe we always said our son would be a brilliant naturalist. If he was basically Darwin, he would have been happy. That's what he excels at, that intuitively. So
Mhm.
he is a present person, but he's been in jail over and over and over again because of his illness. And so we incarcerate these people.
Yeah, and it's interesting I guess the history and the way I see it of just um, the war on drugs and drug addiction in this country. A lot of it came from Nixon era and government organizations actually bringing in the drugs from Mexico and funneling it into black communities to try to
Right. Oh,
incarcerate them.
don't
And so
get me started.
you have this mentality that well they're separate and they're bad. And then now what we were seeing over the past few decades is it move into the white suburbs. So now you're starting to see this, I think, more of a narrative of, well, it's an illness and we need to be helping people, not putting them away because it's moved into the personal realm of most people as opposed to it being those poor ghettos over here where it is all happening.
Oh, well, I mean, Jamie, you're right on. I mean, the fact is that actually most of the opioid use is white folks. It's
Mhm.
not black
Mm-hmm.
folks.
Right.
It's basically the here in San Diego they call the area along the beach between La Jolla and Pacific Beach Heroin Alley. I mean, it's the rich white kids that are using heroin. Not so. Absolutely. I mean, it's heartbreaking. So we have to include a component of racial justice in our drug war effort. We have to basically we like the Portuguese model where all drugs are legalized, not because we want anybody to use drugs, but we want to stop the incarceration. So we have to take a very radical, different stance, or lots of people are going to die.
Yeah.
Predominantly white suburban kids, actually.
Right. And I think, going along with what you were saying about the taking a different stance, I think we also have to acknowledge the financial component that has supported the mass incarceration. That now we have these for-profit prisons, and so there's a huge pushback against any efforts to change any of the sentencing and mass incarceration, because there's so much money. People are making billions and billions of dollars on basically slave labor. Mm-hmm. And until we are able to do something about that piece, the fight is going to be so difficult, because when there's huge financial interest, there's so much pushback against it. And I think that that's added so much to the problem just in the last 15 years, especially. I mean, the prison rates, mass incarceration has doubled in the last 15 years. It's just insane how quickly it's gone up. And it's because people are making so much money.
Absolutely. I mean, Whole Foods, for example, is one corporation that very hugely depends on prison labor. Mm-hmm. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
So, yeah, absolutely, we have to struggle and stop this. I imagine you're both aware that there's been a prison strike for the last several
September 9th. Yes.
And the fact of the matter is, our media is saying nothing about it. And yet I'm hearing that it is challenging some of the profits of these corporations. That the inmates are saying, no way, we're not going to be slave labor. We're done. This is not the new Jim Crow. We're done with the new Jim Crow. Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because it wasn't just the prisoners who were protesting. A lot of the workers at the prisons protested with them, and that's
amazing.
That's huge. And think about how huge that is for prisoners and workers in the prison to be protesting the same thing together on the same side, and nobody's reporting it.
It's not reported at all. No,
it's just it's so clear how that there's a reason that it's not being reported, and that's just really frustrating.
I think now, almost 15 years ago, New Path built a labyrinth garden along with the inmates in Donovan Prison. I remember we spent a great deal of money, a beautiful labyrinth garden. We brought in a labyrinth specialist to teach the inmates how to walk the labyrinth. When the men would go on lockdown, the guards wouldn't water the garden, and it would die. And we would put it back in, and then the men would go on lockdown, and it would die. Mm-hmm. The prison cruelty is beyond me. And I know it can be different because we all know, we've seen Scandinavian prisons that have the capacity for humanity and a sense of decency in the way that people are treated. So we don't have to have this. We've got to do something to stop this. This is a form of slavery. And it's an abomination. It's an outrage.
Yeah. And just for any viewers who are unaware, I was just in Iceland for a time too, and the Scandinavian viewpoint is they don't have prisons. They're rehabilitation centers, and the sentencing is a lot lower, and the whole point is to rehabilitate the prisoners so that they can be reintegrated into society and thrive. And that's where the resources are. And in those countries, when you look at the percentages per capita, their prison population is incredibly low because of that. And the repeat offenders is very low in comparison. Because I know a lot of people, especially with drug issues, like my brother said it, prison's an easier place to be than home. So a lot of times they'll go to prison and they want to go back because it's like you were talking about earlier. It's their community. They get food. They get shelter. There's people that understand them, but they're not getting any of the resources they need to improve their lives.
Well, but here's a scary new problem. When they're discharged because they have probably not used, I'm talking specifically about opioids, but they haven't been using, or they've been using infrequently, when they come out, they're at high risk of dying.
Mm-hmm.
And so lots of people, when they think finally, hallelujah, I'm out, they're dying in droves because they don't know what's a safe quantity of opioid that they can use. So, and then the prisons should actually absolutely be ethically mandated to give naloxone to everybody leaving the prison.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think they're ever going to do that. Although I am told now that some of our California prisons do have naloxone in the prison for overdoses. That's good. But this is terrible because you shouldn't pay with death to be completing your sentence. That's bizarre, but that's happening to a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think my last question is actually about what some other countries do. Canada just they were doing it for a while and then it was banned and now it's been approved again of people who are in rehabilitation centers can actually go and get medical grade heroin doses, so they don't have to go cold turkey. And then I guess that you can correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding of it is that you slowly come off of it as you're getting your psychology treatments and all your treatments.
Well, actually, New York City, Seattle, and I believe LA are now going to have safe heroin and distribute heroin in safe injection sites. And it's an experimental plan, but I do think that we are embracing the Canadian and the Portuguese model. We're moving in that direction. You're probably aware of Gabor Mate. Gabor Mate wrote a book called In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. He's a physician who runs a hotel in Vancouver, British Columbia. And the first floor is safe injection sites and available medications, Suboxone or methadone, whatever. And then the whole floor is like that NICU. You can go up and down in the 8th floor hotel where whatever you want to do. If you want to have 5 years clean, you live on the top floors. If you still want to use, they'll actually provide you with safe injection sites on the. So the Canadians are very progressive, and this is the direction that we have to go in the United States. There's no question, or we're just going to have a worsening epidemic of death and incarceration. How horrible! Death and incarceration. That's a terrible outcome if we don't stop this horrific pattern.
Well, thank you very much. This was a wonderful and much, I think, needed conversation. And anyone who's watching, please join us on Twitter and Facebook at CivilD and give us any of your feedback or any suggestions or any topics you would like for a next segment. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much.
Oh, it was such a treat. You guys, I figured out how to use the Skype.
Yay!
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.